Welcome to Fireside History, where the past comes to life. If you enjoy this retelling, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to hear more. The Siege of Alesia, 52 BC. Night drapes itself over the hills of eastern Gaul like a burial shroud. The stars hang motionless, cold witnesses to the last convulsions of a dying nation. Beneath them, two worlds prepare to collide. One, a weary but proud confederation of Celtic tribes clinging to their ancestral freedom. The other, a rising empire, cold-blooded, calculating, relentless. The smoke of countless fires curls into the black sky, each one a fragile hope in the face of extinction. It is the autumn of 52 BC, and the fate of Gaul teeters on a knife's edge. To understand Alesia, we must first understand the man it was built to defy. Gaius Julius Caesar, consul, conqueror, political predator. By the time he marched into Gaul in 58 BC, he was already deeply entangled in Rome's brutal power struggles. He didn't come north merely to secure the borders. He came to make his name echo through eternity. And for 6 long years, he carved his reputation into the very soil, in blood, fire, and iron. The conquest of Gaul was not a single campaign. It was a slow suffocation, a chain of battles, betrayals, sieges, and massacres. From the Helvetii in the Alps to the Belgae in the north, Caesar's legions moved with deadly precision, a tide of iron washing across Celtic resistance. But no matter how many tribes bent the knee, Gaul never truly broke. In 52 BC, one man rose to light a final fire. His name? Vercingetorix. Tall, young, and radiating the defiant charisma of a born leader, Vercingetorix was no mere tribal chieftain. He was a unifier, the rarest kind of warrior in a land fractured by centuries of clan rivalry. When the Arverni crowned him as their king, he called the tribes to rise, and they answered. They burned their own crops to starve Caesar. They harried his supply lines. They struck hard and disappeared into the forests. And when the Romans chased them, they led them into empty towns, scorched fields and traps. Vercingetorix was no fool. He could not outnumber Caesar's legions in the open, but he could bleed them, exhaust them, break their spirit. For a time it worked. Then came Alesia. Alesia, perched high on a fortified hill in the lands of the Mandubi. A natural fortress, flanked by rivers and cliffs with strong walls already in place. It was the perfect redoubt, a place to make a stand, to force Caesar to overextend and walk into the jaws of a trap. Vercingetorix brought his army inside the city, some 80,000 strong by Roman estimates, though the true number may have been less. He sent out riders to rally reinforcements. If all went to plan, Caesar would be caught between the garrison and a massive relief army. The conqueror would become the besieged. But Caesar, as ever, refused to play by expectations. Instead of storming the city, he began to build. Line by line, ditch by ditch, mile by mile, the Romans began raising the most audacious siege works the ancient world had ever seen. A double ring of entrenchments, one facing inwards to trap the Gauls inside Alesia, the other facing outwards to repel any army that might come to the rescue. 400,000 Roman hands worked day and night, digging trenches, erecting ramparts, sharpening stakes. Moats were flooded. Caltraps and hidden pits littered the killing zones. Observation towers rose like silent sentinels across the hills. It was not just a siege. It was a statement, a wall around a nation's last hope. Inside Alesia, the mood was brittle. At first, there was confidence. Vercingetorix's cavalry had escaped before the Romans closed the ring. They would bring help. The food stocks would hold. Morale was high. But days dragged into weeks. The bread ran low, then the meat, then nothing. The wounded lay in dark corners. Feverish and forgotten, children cried themselves hoarse. Old men stared blankly into the flames at night, their hands trembling around empty bowls. There are no grand speeches in hunger, only muttered prayers and gnawing silence. Desperation took root. Vercingetorix, desperate to preserve his warriors, expelled the town's civilians, women, children, the elderly. He sent them out through the gates and towards the Roman lines. But Caesar refused to let them pass. The legions stood, silent and unmoved, as the refugees begged for mercy. None came. Caught between two armies, they starved in the no-man's land, visible to both sides. A slow, living death. A warning. A question of resolve. Did the Gallic warriors inside have the will to keep fighting, knowing what it cost? Let us pause, briefly, to marvel at what Caesar's legions achieved. 4 meters high, 11 miles long. The inner circumvallation was a serpent of timber and earth, bristling with sharpened stakes. Beyond it, another 14 miles of fortification faced outward, equally deadly. Each trench was filled with traps, rows of iron-tipped stakes, camouflaged pits, snares and spikes. Legionaries called them lilies, because from above they bloomed in a deadly flower of iron. Behind the ramparts stood towers every 80 feet, each manned day and night with archers, slingers, and watchful eyes. Signal fires stood ready. War horns. Ballistae, Roman torsion-powered artillery, waited loaded and silent, their bolts the length of a man. This was Roman warfare at its peak, brutal, methodical, and terrifying in its precision. And every day the ring tightened. Still, Vercingetorix waited. Hope lay beyond the hills. From the north and west, the relief army was coming. Word had reached every tribe still willing to fight. By September they had gathered a massive host, perhaps as many as 250,000 warriors. Caesar's scouts spotted their approach by the dust rising over the ridgelines. Trumpets sounded. Orders rippled across the Roman lines. Men dropped tools and grabbed weapons. The trap had sprung, albeit not as Vercingetorix intended. Now it was Caesar, caught between two enemies, and he did not flinch. He addressed his legates in the cold morning light, his voice steady, his command absolute. No retreat, no panic. They would hold the inner line against Alesia and the outer line against the relief army. The siege was about to become a war on 2 fronts. On the 3rd night after the relief army arrived, the Gauls struck. Under cover of darkness, their warriors swarmed the Roman outer defences, howling, slamming against palisades, hurling javelins and spears. From inside Alesia, Vercingetorix launched a coordinated sally, trying to overwhelm the inner walls. It was chaos, screams, fire, horns blaring across the night, the thunder of hooves, arrows hissing in the dark. A Roman centurion later wrote of that night, "We could not see their faces, only the whites of their eyes and the gleam of blades. They came like wolves, but we stood." Legionaries packed shoulder to shoulder, raised their scooter, the heavy curved shields that formed a wall of iron. Behind them, Pila whistled through the air, the deadly Roman throwing spears designed to penetrate and then bend on impact, rendering enemy shields useless. Ballistae loosed their bolts, thudding into flesh and timber. Slingers cracked stone shot against skulls. Engineers poured pitch and flaming oil from the towers. Some sections nearly buckled. But Caesar had planned for this. He moved reinforcements swiftly between lines, using hidden corridors cut behind the ramparts. By dawn, the Gallic assault had shattered. The next day brought silence. Smoke drifted over the fields. Birds circled above the corpses. Inside Alesia, the mood was different now. No more songs, no more brave words, only the grinding ache of despair. Vercingetorix paced the walls, watching the distant shapes of the relief army, still camped just beyond reach. His face was stone, but his eyes betrayed him. He knew, if they failed again, there would be no third chance. And still, Caesar did not move, did not taunt, did not offer surrender. He simply waited. The cold seeped into everything. Leather cracked, iron bit into raw hands. Men wrapped cloaks tight around their bodies, but still the chill found them. It was the kind of cold that gets into your bones, not just from the air, but from the waiting. 3 days had passed since the great assault, and still nothing moved. Caesar stood on the heights behind his lines, flanked by his senior officers. Below them the siege works sprawled like a monstrous web. Trenches, towers, palisades, traps. Beyond, in the shadowed woods and hollows, the relief army lay coiled, waiting, watching. They would come again, that much was certain, and when they did, they would not hold back. Inside the Gallic camp, the chieftains had gathered for one last council. By torchlight, hunched over rough maps and scarred wooden tables, they laid out their final throw of the dice. The first assault had failed because it was split, divided by timing, by terrain, by confusion. The next would be unified, coordinated, furious. They had found a weakness, a low-lying section in the Roman outer defences, near a marshy hollow where the hills converged. The fortifications there were hastily constructed, the trenches narrower. If they could breach that point with overwhelming force, and if Vercingetorix struck from the inside at the same moment, Caesar's lines would fold. His army would be crushed between hammer and anvil. But the cost would be terrible. They knew that, and they prepared anyway. Hundreds of wicker shields were woven by torchlight. Siege ladders and grappling hooks were fashioned from trees cut in secret. Warriors were assigned in waves, the first to storm the trench, the next to push through, the last to follow with fire. At dawn the ground itself would burn. It began before first light. The air was still, somewhat unnaturally so, not a breath of wind, just the low rumble of thousands of feet moving through the fog. Then a roar, not from voices, from horns, deep, primal, shaking the ground beneath the Roman ramparts. The Gauls came in a wave, not reckless this time, but calculated, dense ranks moving with precision, their front lines protected by mantlets and tall wicker shields. Slingers and archers harried the Roman towers. Behind them, ladders and battering rams trundled forward. Caesar's men surged to meet them. At the weak point near the marsh, the attack fell hardest. The first line of palisades cracked. The ditch began to fill, not with mud, but with bodies. Roman peeler whistled overhead. Then came the javelins from the towers, slingstones, arrows, and still the Gauls pressed forward. One Roman tribune, Marcus Antonius, the man who would one day become Mark Antony, fought near that sector. His tunic was soaked through with blood by mid-morning, none of it his. He rallied the line again and again, screaming Latin curses over the clash of shields and war cries. His men loved him for it, fought like wolves around him. But the Gallic pressure did not ease. And then Vercingetorix struck. From the gates of Alesia, he unleashed everything he had left. His warriors poured from the fortress like a dam breaking, starved, hollow-eyed, but full of fury. They hurled stones, spears, axes. They swarmed the Roman inner wall with ladders and bare hands. Now Caesar's army was stretched, pinned between two fronts. Men on the outer lines could hear the sounds of battle behind them. Smoke began to rise from the inner siege towers. It was working. The trap was closing. Caesar could have stayed behind the lines, issued orders through messengers, let his legates handle the fighting. But that was not the kind of commander he was. In the midday haze he mounted his war-horse, a grey Andalusian stallion bred for battle, and rode straight to the crisis point near the marsh. He wore his crimson cloak, the paludamentum, the mark of a Roman general in the field. His presence alone sent a jolt through the ranks. Men saw him, calm, resolute, eyes fixed like iron, and steadied. He ordered a reserve cohort to charge, fresh troops held back for this very moment. They slammed into the flank of the Gallic attackers, catching them as they scaled the embankment. The fighting became hand-to-hand, brutal, up close, shield edge to skull, blade to belly, mud and blood indistinguishable. Then came the German cavalry. Caesar had brought them as auxiliaries, fierce riders from across the Rhine, merciless in their tactics. He unleashed them now, in a wide arc around the Gallic rear. They struck like thunder, galloping through the shallows, javelins flashing in the sun, horses foaming at the mouth. The Gallic left, buckled, then shattered. Panic spread like wildfire. From the walls of Alesia, Vercingetorix saw the chaos and understood. It was over. The outer army, the last hope of Gaul, began to disintegrate. It didn't happen all at once, but you could see the cracks spreading. First, one tribe broke ranks and fled into the hills. Then another. The centre held for a moment, then realised they were alone. The Roman cavalry rode them down without mercy. The plain outside Alesia became a graveyard. Arrows littered the earth like stalks of wheat. Broken spears jutted from corpses. Horses screamed. Warriors begged for death. Some tried to surrender, raising hands, casting down shields. Some were spared. Most were not. Inside the fortress all was still. No more charges, no more cries, just silence, and the slow creeping weight of inevitability. The next morning, the gates of Alesia opened. There was no ceremony, no defiance, just a long, low line of warriors, weapons cast aside, walking out into captivity. And at their head, a figure on horseback, Vercingetorix. He rode alone, straight-backed, unbound. His armour was scratched, his cloak torn, but his eyes were steady. He dismounted before Caesar and dropped the reins. And then, without a word, he removed his sword, walked to the Roman general, and laid it at his feet. It was not just the surrender of a man, it was the surrender of a civilization. Caesar had won, against impossible odds, outnumbered, outflanked, besieged in reverse, and still he held. The Siege of Alesia was not just a military triumph. It was a masterstroke of engineering, of discipline, of will. More than 800 enemy camps and fortifications had been overrun in the prior campaigns. But here, in this one moment, the war for Gaul had been decided. Over the following weeks, the Roman legions moved through the countryside, mopping up the last resistance. The message was clear: surrender or be annihilated. And most did. Those who survived were enslaved or absorbed. Villages Romanized, roads built, Latin spoken. The land of the Celts began its long transformation into Roman Gaul. As for Vercingetorix, he was taken in chains, paraded in Caesar's triumph in Rome, held in a cell for 6 years, and then strangled quietly as the celebrations ended. The silence that followed Alesia was unlike any Gaul had ever known. It wasn't peace, it was the hush of something broken. In the months that followed, village after village sent emissaries to the Roman camps. Chiefs wrapped in furs, barefoot, eyes hollow. They offered tribute, hostages, submission. not all surrendered. A few tribes fled into the deep woods, clinging to the old ways. Others made one last stand and died with their faces to the enemy. But they were embers, scattered, flickering out one by one. The fire of united resistance, the fire Vercingetorix had ignited, had been snuffed out on the hills of Alesia. The land that had once been a patchwork of fiercely independent peoples was now a province in everything but name. Gaul was lost, and Rome had won. When Julius Caesar finally returned to Rome, he did so not as a general, but as a legend. The Senate, half in awe and half in fear, granted him an unprecedented triumph. 4 days of parades, games, and glory. The streets were choked with spectators, every rooftop packed. Flowers rained from balconies, incense burned, the cries of Ave Caesar echoed off marble colonnades. In the years after Alesia, Gaul was reshaped. The Roman machine moved quickly, as it always did. Roads, forums, amphitheatres. Cities with Latin names rose where sacred groves had once stood. Roman law replaced tribal custom. Roman coin replaced barter. Young men were drafted into Caesar's legions. Old warriors became taxpayers. The Druids, once the spiritual heartbeat of Gallic life, were outlawed, their groves desecrated, their rituals banned. But Rome didn't erase Gaul. It absorbed it, twisted it into something new. Within a generation, Gallic nobility dressed in togas. Their sons studied rhetoric. Their daughters married Roman merchants. And by the time of the Emperor Claudius, barely a century later, some of Gaul's descendants would sit in the Senate itself. From resistance to representation, from enemy to citizen, that was Rome's true genius. And yet, listen closely. In the soil of Burgundy, farmers still dig up Roman nails, rusted, square-headed, driven by legionary hands over 2,000 years ago. In the forests near Alès-Saint-Reine, the modern site most historians now agree was Alesia, you can still walk the ridges where the towers once stood. The earth bears their imprint, faint but real. A ghost map of war stitched into the hills. And in French legend, passed from mouth to mouth, never quite forgotten, Vercingetorix remains a hero. Not for his victory, but for his defiance. For centuries he was little more than a footnote in Caesar's commentaries, a noble enemy mentioned briefly, then cast aside. But after the fall of Rome, after the rise of France, after the revolutions and empires of 1,000 years, the Gauls found their voice again. In the 19th century, a towering statue of Vercingetorix was raised on Mont Ossois, near the battlefield. Not as a king, not as a god, but as a man who dared to fight for his people against impossible odds. And that statue bears an inscription from Napoleon himself. Gaul united, forming a single nation, animated by the same spirit, can defy the universe. It is not a Roman inscription. It is not written in victory. It is written in longing, in memory, in fire. The Siege of Alesia is often told as a masterclass in military engineering, a showcase of Caesar's brilliance, and it was. But it is also a warning, a reminder of what empire really means. Not glory in marble halls or laurels on a general's brow, but the grinding wheel of conquest, the slow suffocation of culture, the iron cage of submission dressed up as civilization. And yet Rome brought order, roads, literacy, a common law, trade routes that would outlive even the legions. For some, it was salvation. For others, a sentence. That duality and the brilliance and brutality of empire is written all over Alesia. It is not a simple story. That's why it matters. Because neither is history. Thank you for listening to Fireside History. If this story moved you, Please like, comment and subscribe. Your support helps keep the fire burning.